discussing an essay we just posted on Substack. What if AI proves the Riemann hypothesis and nobody looks? The essay is about the question, what does AI actually serve? Like, what's the use of AI? Or to use the title as a symbol, what if it does something really amazing, but we don't even see it, or we don't understand it, or in simple terms, we overlook it, for example? Like, is it still valid? Is it not valid? This is a philosophical question that has been asked over the last couple of thousand years. For example, is a tree falling in the forest falling if we don't see it? Does it really matter? It was really a big deal during the early days of quantum physics, when there was this dichotomy between what's going on in the world and the observer that actually influences the events of the world. So there was a lot of that conversation going on between the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics and I don't think there's a clear solution to this, and I want to keep it simple. In this essay, I want to just say, if AI doesn't serve human needs, it's irrelevant. That's a hypothesis. I'm willing to discuss this in another installment, but for this essay, that's the preliminary assumption, because the essay then goes on and actually talks about the future of human labor and connects the question of what AI actually serves towards, well, it's going to serve human needs, and humans will define goals that the AI is going to produce. So the future of human labor is turning from execution to allocation, and we're all going to become the CEOs of an AI labor force. That's the fundamental thesis here, and therefore the goal setting itself, or the ability to set goals, good goals, I'm going to define what good goal means, is going to be crucial. This is Not Even On Podcast. It's February 17, 2026. This is Krim Dalko. For the year, we're down 8%. The market is up 2%. We're underperforming by roughly 10%. These numbers are rough and the market's still open, so it could change. So this essay, what if the AI proves the Riemann hypothesis and nobody looks? It's a provocative title with, I think, a little bit less of a dramatic conclusion, and that is that unless AI serves human needs, it's irrelevant. So this is the preliminary hypothesis, and then we start with I think the best definition I've heard of intelligence. That's John McCarthy's definition, which is something along the lines of intelligence is the computational part of the ability to achieve goals in the world. So we start with that definition. We like that definition because it has the computational part and achieving goals. So that's the way we work. Other people have different assumptions. Again, it's important to understand what these ideas are based on in order to discuss them. So having said that, you have the computational part, which of course is driven by energy and the ability to compute and building chips and having the right algorithms and all of these things that are important for AI. But the goals, and that's something I think people don't talk about it enough. The goals are going to become the constraining factor. Right now, we're constrained by memory, we're constrained by energy. Soon, we're not going to be constrained by energy once we go orbital. But what we're always going to be constrained is actually goals. And goal setting is going to become the single most important driver of economic growth. Because good goals are goals that serve human needs, that are monetizable. Good goals are goals that can be executed. If you want another definition of good goals, is solving problems that people actually care about and they're willing to pay for. And those goals will proliferate throughout the world and eventually throughout the universe. And we end the essay with a picture with a human as the center of the universe, which is inspired by David Deutsch. We are literally the cone of consciousness in the universe, and we're going to leverage our own ability to think, or our own biological Turing machine, into a massive industrial Turing machine, which is much bigger and much more powerful. because it can harness a lot more energy and actually develop a lot more intelligence, because the ultimate goal, of course, is to develop more intelligence, because intelligence has infinite demand, because intelligence breeds intelligence. Intelligence breeds knowledge, which creates new problems which need to be solved, and therefore generate new intelligence. So we're setting the human at the center of an AI-driven economy where execution is taken over by the AI and allocation is taken over by humans. Now, as a caveat, there's certainly a scenario where eventually humans will compete with AI in terms of goal setting. So the AI could maybe come up with better goals, but the goals always have to serve humans. This is absolutely key. And I'm willing to discuss this further, not in this essay, but I think you can make a case that the AIs that don't serve human goals will eventually die out, because the humans are deciding with their collective consciousness where AI is going. So for example, just if we have, let's say, a company like Anthropic, which in my opinion is anything short but evil, because they are trying to, through regulatory capture, take over AI and control people. Like when they talk about AI safety, what they really talk about is control. And that's an evil thing that most people don't want. So that is not going to prevail. I think the fear that we're going to have AI overlords, which Anthropic wants to become, is not possible, because we live in a decentralized world, and AI is decentralizing the world even more. I talk about this as the advent of the CEO economy. We have a decentralized world where everybody is the CEO of their own company, and everybody generates their own goals. And the goals that prevail in the marketplace are monetizable, and the marketplace is a human-driven marketplace. So that's what puts the human at the center of the universe. Now I want to say a few words about goal setting. I think again, there's not enough research on what that actually means. We lean on Richard Sutton's recent essay, The Era of Experience. Sutton also leans on John McCarthy's definition. So Sutton's very goal-driven when it comes to AI. He says, look, eventually the AI will act in the real world and take the signals from the real world as a feedback loop to improve itself and follow goals. And he also introduces plasticity in his model, where the AI can generate its own goals and therefore become more and more useful, if you will. But I think we want to emphasize the fact that in a marketplace that is fundamentally driven by what I call the values of the US Constitution, because this could change in a system like Europe with regulatory capture, or even worse, China with dictatorship. But in the US, as we speak, there is still, at least in principle, there is the pillars of values that the US Constitution is based on, allow the individual to set goals for herself and then pursue those goals in a marketplace, of course, with democratic institutions trying to aggregate those goals into wherever necessary common goals. We need government for several things, not most things, and our government is rotten right now and difficult. And I think, again, this is for a whole other episode. We believe that we need to change our government. The best way to do that is actually to change the Constitution of the United States in terms of splitting up basically segregation into different states and different constituencies, and then let them compete for the best governance, and then converge towards that. So that's but again, that's for a different episode. We just want to, again, as an assumption, just assume or say that right now, at least globally, the US Constitution and the value system that the US is based on is still the best place to be, and therefore also the best nurturing ground for AI. And within that context, AI will stay human-centric, and humans in a decentralized world will set the goals. Goal setting in itself is it is the engine of knowledge, because knowledge is when intelligence becomes useful, it turns into knowledge. And in the marketplace of intelligence, only the intelligence that is useful ends up being knowledge. So for example, and that was kind of a little bit maybe the Riemann hypothesis idea. What if it's not useful? What if we can't prove it because it's not useful? Maybe we should turn this whole thing upside down and not say, well, we can't solve fusion energy. I wish we could, but we can't. Maybe fusion energy is a bad problem and it should not be solved, and that's why we can't solve it. And good problems are solvable and bad problems are not solvable. Maybe that's a conjecture. Maybe the Riemann hypothesis is not that important. Maybe we shouldn't be wasting our time because we can't solve it. And something we can't solve in principle is also not useful because it's not in sort of our action space, or in other words, it doesn't follow the laws of cognitive abilities, or if you will. It's just not in our action space. Now, these are again conjectures that could be discussed and more, I can see already counter arguments being made here. Yeah, but sometimes we have to wait till results come up and we have to do research and all that. Yeah, I agree with that, but I still think that fundamentally an AI that is not serving human needs is not useful. And if the AI does things that we don't care about, it's just a bunch of zeros and ones. We talk about the hammer that's looking for nails, something very common right now in the AI industry. I mean, tech entrepreneurs are incredibly good at developing hammers and then creating the nails for the hammers. In other words, finding use cases for their products and services, and sometimes they succeed, sometimes they don't. But in the marketplace, only the ones that can long-term succeed actually prevail, and the ones that don't, they fail. We have a couple of examples of good goals. Good goal would be, for example, what Tesla's trying to do with the cybercab. A good goal is a goal that typically lowers the cost and increases value for something that people want. Something that people always want, like transportation. And if you lower the cost and increase the value, like we like Jeff Bezos's approach in his early days of Amazon, where he said, look, I cannot predict the future, but one thing I can do is I can always be sure that people want lower cost, higher selection. And as a company, we always want more cash flow and growth. And those things will not change no matter what happens. And I think in that realm, we can argue for Tesla also, the cybercab, lower cost, dramatically lower cost, maybe 5x, higher value, personalized transport with beautiful, entertainment. Nobody's looking at you. You're not with strangers, in a bus or train or driven by a taxi cab from the airport. You have your personalized, transport as a service at low cost. So there's always going to be very high demand for that. Another good goal is, energy harvest in orbit, because energy is, there's infinite demand for energy, and we have problems on Earth with NIMBY and other issues. And I think energy is the ultimate equalizer, the ultimate, if anybody really cares about, let's say, social equity and justice and any of those things, having more low-cost energy, orders of magnitude more low-cost energy, is by far the best way to lift people out of poverty and give them opportunity. And then the last goal, the ultimate goal, is of course developing intelligence, and it's an avalanche of intelligence that builds on itself, and intelligence has infinite demand. We spoke about this in one of the previous episodes. This is again, rooted in epistemology, particularly Popperian epistemology, and also David Deutsch's more modern version of that, where new knowledge is built on intelligence is the computational part of pursuing goals and solving problems, and then once the problems become useful, they turn into knowledge, and that new knowledge typically always creates new problems that need to be solved. So there's this flywheel effect, or avalanche actually effect. It's a better analogy, because you're building on top of knowledge. You develop, let's say, orbital data centers, and then your next problem is how can you leverage those for, let's say, a Mars mission. So you need to solve new technical problems. And once you have those problems solved, you want to terraform Mars. There's new problems, new knowledge. So there's an infinite amount of demand for knowledge, and therefore knowledge is the ultimate goal to pursue. We end the essay with the CEO economy, which means that everybody has, in principle, the opportunity to be an allocator of capital, capital being labor, also monetary capital, but since money and labor is kind of almost fungible, the more access to labor you have, the more you can do. Capital becomes less of a constraining factor. It still is, but it will become less and less of a constraining factor, and the ability to set goals will be the ultimate driver of wealth, success, and economic growth. Thank you.